talk about prioritizing muscle health in the era of COVID-19 and beyond. And the way that I've divided up the presentation is I'm going to spend about the first 2/3 of the presentation really just talking about muscle health, the importance of muscle health, referencing key clinical studies that have been done really related to areas that are relevant to COVID-19, right? So there are not many studies that have examined the impact of muscle health on COVID-19 survival directly, but there are many studies that have been published that look at areas related to that, such as ICU survival, ventilator weaning, and related areas, which we'll talk about in some detail. So after giving you that background, that overview, then I'm going to spend the remaining 1/3 talking about Fortetropin, our proprietary product, and the research that we have sponsored related to Fortetropin, research at UC Berkeley and at Kansas State University. So, okay, so I guess a logical place to begin is with the question, why does muscle health matter, right? And so the first reason has to do with longevity. And I'm going to talk about two really important studies that looked at the impact of muscular strength on longevity. One of them is a study that was published by researchers at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. Another is a non-metastatic breast cancer survival study that was published by researchers at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. Another area that's really important has to do with quality of life. So, think about all of the activities, right, that you and your patients enjoy doing outside of work, whether we're talking about golf, tennis, dancing, or biking. Ultimately, to enjoy these activities, I mean, they all depend on good muscle health, right? Another reason has to do with bone health. And so the first is that there is extensive biochemical crosstalk between muscle and bone. So, muscle, for example, produces and secretes insulin growth factor 1, fibroblast growth factor 2, and SPARC, and these proteins are very important for bone homeostasis. And the other aspect that's very important has to do with biomechanical interactions between muscle and bone. So muscle exerts mechanical loading forces against bone, and those mechanical loading forces are very important for bone in terms of being able to maintain its form, its shape, and its density. And that's talked about in this paper by Chin that I cited. Energy metabolism is another aspect. So given that muscle is the primary glucose metabolizing engine of the body, it's not really surprising, right, that reduced muscle mass is associated with type 2 diabetes risk. And this is a paper from a large group in South Korea that reported that people with low muscle mass that were non-diabetic were much more likely to become diabetic when followed over a long period of time. And the other aspect has to do with avoiding injury, right? And so this is a nice paper from the I-Serente study about injury. And so, we rely upon muscle to help us maintain balance. And when our muscle is compromised, when we lose muscle mass, then naturally that leads to compromised balance. And they have shown that in this study, they've reported that leads to significantly increased incidence of falls. So the first study I like to talk about is this study that was done at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden that looks at the impact of muscular strength on mortality in men. And I like this study because it was a very large study that involved 8,762 men. And it was also a study with a long follow-up period of 18.9 years. And so they measured, the outcome measures were all-cause mortality, and they also looked at muscular strength. This was measured by 1 repetition maximal measures for leg and bench presses. And so I realize that I'm showing you a lot of data here, but I'd really like you to just focus on what I've highlighted in the box in red. And so here we have mortality rates for men that participated in the study that were in the lower 1/3 of muscular strength, the middle and upper thirds. And then here it's been stratified by CVD-related mortality and cancer-related mortality. And you can see that overall mortality was about 50% higher for men that were in the bottom 1/3 in terms of their muscular strength in the study. So now let's talk a little bit about COVID-19. Okay, so this is some data that I'm showing you. On the left-hand side, I'm showing you data from January, February of this year, which I know, given all that we've dealt with the pandemic, it seems like a lifetime ago, right? And here, this is showing you case fatality rates for COVID-19 and how that increased so much as a function of age. And this is data from Hubei province, right? Now, the data is displayed in a slightly different format here on the right-hand side when we look at deaths due to COVID-19 in Italy, right? You can see that here they're showing the number of deaths that were reported by Italy's public health agency on the 17th of March. And you can see that it's heavily weighted towards, people who are over the age of 70. And these are primarily, you can expect that people that are older are going to have less muscle mass and less muscular strength to begin with, although we don't have any body composition data on these patients, but we also know that we could expect that they would have lower muscular strength and many pre-existing conditions, right? Such as type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, that really complicate survival due to COVID-19. We see similar trends when it comes to influenza-related survival, right? I mean, this is data from the last flu season, the 2018-2019 flu season. As you can see here, the flu does lead to approximately 500,000 hospitalizations in the United States. And the majority of them involved patients that were older. And along with that, it looks like roughly about 75% of mortalities due to the flu were in older patients. So what do we know about COVID-19 related muscle atrophy? Well, there was this article that was published in Science magazine in April of this year, where they quoted Professor Dale Needham, who is professor of medicine and medical director of the critical care medicine and physical rehabilitation program at Johns Hopkins. And when talking about COVID-19 related muscle atrophy, he wrote, "Those who survive a long period on a ventilator are prone to muscle atrophy and weakness." Now, keeping a critically ill patient moving, raising their arms and legs, and eventually helping them sit up, stand and walk can reduce that weakness and get them off the ventilator faster. But because SARS-CoV-2 is so infectious, bringing rehab specialists into patients' rooms can be a challenge. So we know that, this was published like 4 months ago, 4.5 months ago. We know that since then, as of right now, there are greater than 4 million cases of COVID-19 in the United States, right? And so we know that, helping those patients as physiotherapists such as yourself rebuild and regain muscle is going to be a major challenge for many of these patients, particularly those who are elderly. So as I had told you, right, we don't have specific data on COVID-19 and sarcopenia, on muscle mass, on body composition. But what we do have is we have a lot of data that is related to important aspects that relate to COVID-19, okay? And one of those aspects actually has to do with weaning off of a mechanical ventilator. So I'm sure that all of you remember that back in March of this year, when major lockdowns went into place here in Massachusetts and also in New Jersey, there was great concern about the shortage of ventilators in the United States and whether we would be able to cope with that, right? And at that time, President Trump actually issued an executive order in which he ordered Ford and GM to start manufacturing ventilators. And even Tesla got on board with making ventilators at that time. So this is a study that was published, well before COVID-19 in 2019 at a major academic hospital in Taiwan, where they were looking at the impact of sarcopenia and its influence on the outcome of ventilator weaning. And so here they studied 96 patients that were undergoing mechanical ventilation in the surgical ICU unit of this hospital. Okay, and then what they did was they collected data on the total psoas muscle area. This was based on CT, and then they did extensive analysis to look at their odds ratios related to ICU survival and difficulty in weaning off of the ventilator. So you can see here that if we look at this table, Here we have this column for patients that were difficult to wean and ICU mortality, right? And we have odds ratios for what happens when we have the presence of sarcopenia. And in the presence of sarcopenia, you can see that the probability of them becoming difficult to wean is 4.767 times higher. And there is more than 5 times the likelihood of ICU mortality in patients that are sarcopenic, that have low muscle mass relative to those patients that were on a mechanical ventilator and that were not sarcopenic, okay? And so we know that unfortunately, some of the most ill COVID-19 patients, as I discussed, unfortunately, they often end up in the ICU on a mechanical ventilator. One of the other complications of COVID-19 also is pneumonia, right? I mean, that is one of the severe complications of COVID-19. And so this is a study that was published, again, well before COVID-19. This was published back in 2017. Study published by researchers at Tamana Regional Health Medical Center in Kumamoto, Japan. And this was a geriatric hospital, and they were looking at the impact of sarcopenia on 90-day mortality following a diagnosis of aspiration pneumonia. And there were 151 subjects that participated. They were all elderly subjects with a mean age of 85.9 years. And here they looked at appendicular skeletal muscle index. This was measured by bioelectrical impedance analysis. And they measured that, and then they wanted to look at the impact of low muscle mass on 90-day survival following a diagnosis of aspiration pneumonia. And you can see here that the black represents patients that were in the top 75%, okay, as far as ASMI is concerned. And here, this dotted line represents the patients that were in the bottom 25% related to their appendicular skeletal muscle index. And so you can see that the probability of survival was much lower for these patients, unfortunately. Now, a study unrelated to COVID-19, though, was a study that was published by researchers at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital that looked at women that were diagnosed with non-metastatic breast cancer between January of 2000 and December of 2013. And so CT was performed at the time of diagnosis. And the women were placed into different buckets, such as sarcopenia, poor muscle quality as measured by low muscle radiodensity, and excess adiposity. And you can see that the main outcome measures were overall survival time and all-cause mortality. Once again, I'm showing you a lot of data, but the key thing to note is that when we compare women that were non-sarcopenic, that had low total adipose tissue, right? And then we make a comparison with those women that were sarcopenic and also had low total adipose tissue. We can see that the hazard ratio increased from 1 to 1.35. And similar trends were noted, right? When we look at medium and total adipose tissue, medium and high total adipose tissue in non-sarcopenic and sarcopenic groups. And then if you look on the right-hand side, there's a Kaplan-Meier plot that shows survival function. And you can see that it's significantly lower for women that were sarcopenic at the time they were diagnosed with non-metastatic breast cancer relative to those women that were not sarcopenic. So now let's talk a little bit about frailty. Okay, so the clinical definition of frailty, as outlined in this article, is the presence of 3 or more of the following components. And these components are shrinking or weight loss, weakness, poor endurance and energy, slowness, and low physical activity level. And so, why are we discussing frailty right now, right? Well, this is an article that was published by Professor John Morley, one of the key opinion leaders in the sarcopenia field at St. Louis University. And essentially he wrote that the editorial has suggested that sarcopenia is really the major cause of frailty, right? And clearly it's very clear to all of us that frailty is really something that has a terrible impact on quality of life, for all of us and for the patients that all of you see on a regular basis. So here I discuss a bit about how much protein do older adults need. This is a really nice study that you may enjoy going through in detail afterwards. But essentially, what it discusses is that as we get older, people also have higher protein requirements, right? And so, typically for people our age, protein requirements, the recommended daily allowance is about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram per day, per kilogram of body weight. And so here there are a series of studies where they've reported that for older adults, their recommended daily allowance of protein really should be somewhere in the ballpark of about 1.2 to 1.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. In addition to just increasing protein consumption for older adults, the source of protein is very important, and so that has to do with the leucine content, right? And so there are multiple studies that have reported that greater than 2.5 grams per meal of leucine in older adults really has a restorative impact on muscle protein synthesis. And so here this talks about leucine content in whey protein isolate relative to soy and pea protein as well, and R represents rice protein concentrate. This is a study that talked about the importance of protein intake distribution. And so this was a particularly interesting study where they had one group of subjects, right, that consumed their protein very evenly across all 3 meals, so 33, 33, 33. And then there was an uneven group where they consumed the majority of their protein at dinner. And what this showed was that this was very interesting because a very different trend was observed for younger adults. For younger adults, what they found was that muscle synthesis was actually more efficient, was higher in the group that consumed their protein evenly. But as you can see, looking at for older adults, there didn't really seem to be much of an impact as to whether protein was consumed evenly throughout the day or whether it was consumed unevenly, with most of the protein skewed towards the evening meal. But the key thing here is that older adults really need to consume more protein, and they need to make sure that they consume protein with a high leucine content. And so whey is really the best from that standpoint. So now I'll shift gears a bit. That's really the first 2/3 or so of the presentation. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our product, Fortetropin, and research that we have sponsored on Fortetropin. So Fortetropin is a natural product that is made from fertilized chicken egg yolk. Okay, but the product is manufactured using a patented process that was developed by researchers at the German Institute of Food Technologies in Quakenbrück, Germany. And so the idea is that using this patented process, it helps to better retain the natural bioactivity of the proteins, peptides, and lipids that are found to be present within egg yolk, right? And so when eggs are cooked, proteins unfold, they're denatured, and lipids get oxidized. And eating eggs raw, as you know, is very dangerous, right, due to salmonella, listeria, and so on and so forth. Fortetropin has been shown to lead to increases in muscle mass and strength, and to prevent atrophy, to improve recovery. And I'm going to talk about some of that data. It's manufactured in modern state-of-the-art GMP facilities in Germany, and the manufacturing process is covered by 2 issued US patents. One question that always comes up when we talk about Fortetropin is the risk of eating eggs on a regular basis and lipid profile, cardiovascular disease risk, and mortality. So I'd like to talk about this study that was published in January of this year. I know it seems like a lifetime ago, but really only 7 months ago. And this is a very important study. This was a meta-analysis. And what they found is that they looked at 177,000 individuals, okay, from 5 countries across 6 continents. And they reported that they did not find any significant associations between egg intake and blood lipids, mortality, or major CVD events. Now, this is based, though, on consuming 1 egg per day, right? And Fortetropin, 1 serving of Fortetropin is actually the equivalent of only 2/3 of an egg. So the most important study that we have sponsored to date that relates to Fortetropin is a clinical study that was done at the University of California at Berkeley. The principal investigator was Professor William Evans, one of the key opinion leaders in the sarcopenia field with about roughly 300 publications to his credit. And so what they did in this study was they wanted to look at the impact of Fortetropin on the rate of muscle protein synthesis after 21 days in men and women between 60 to 75 years of age. So this was a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. There were 10 subjects that received Fortetropin, 5 men and 5 women. And there were 10 subjects that received placebo, the cheese powder, right? 5 men, 5 women. And so all of these subjects, they had to consume heavy water, like deuterium oxide, on a daily basis. And so the deuterium oxide essentially was used as a tracer, right? Because the idea is that some of those deuterons will eventually get incorporated into all of the amino acids that are produced throughout the body, and thus the protein. So 21 days after taking their assigned supplement, Fortetropin or placebo, and consuming the tracer, the subjects actually had to go for a muscle microbiopsy, right? So they took some muscle tissue during the muscle microbiopsy. They extracted proteins from the muscle tissue, digested those proteins with trypsin, and then analyzed them using high-resolution mass spectrometry. So when you use high-resolution mass spectrometry, you can very accurately quantify how much deuterium is present there. And then the amount of deuterium that's present gives you a direct read on how much stimulation is happening, right, to the muscle protein synthesis. And so they identified a number of proteins, and this is all talked about in detail in this Journal of Gerontology paper, involved in a number of different functions, such as mitochondrial biogenesis, nuclear proteins, ECM proteins, various cytosolic proteins, and so on and so forth. And what they did find is that if you look at this plot, so we have proteins that are myofibril proteins listed on the x-axis. On the y-axis, the blue bars represent cheese powder, the fractional synthesis rate of the group that received cheese powder, and the orange bar corresponds to those that receive Fortetropin. And what we found was that the overall magnitude of the increase in the Fortetropin supplemented group was about 18% relative to the group that received placebo, okay? Now, we also did another human clinical trial that we sponsored. There's another human clinical trial that was sponsored some time ago at the University of Tampa. And this was a study that involved young subjects between 18 to 21 years of age. They're college students, and we divided them up into 3 groups. So there were 15 subjects that received cheese powder placebo, 15 subjects that received a single dose of Fortetropin, 6.6 grams per day, and 15 subjects that received 19.8 grams per day. And so what you can see looking at this is that the subjects that received Fortetropin, they experienced roughly about 3-fold the gain in muscle mass relative to the subjects that received the placebo. So the average gain in muscle mass for subjects in the placebo group was 0.6 kilograms over a 12-week period. What we observed was 1.7 and 1.8 kilogram gain in lean body mass in the subjects that receive Fortetropin, right? And then we see consistent measurements, a trend which is pretty consistent when we look at muscle thickness as measured by ultrasound, shown here on the right. Now, we did this study at Kansas State University, and this study, although it was done in dogs, it's very, very relevant to what all of you do. I mean, at Kessler, in the area of rehabilitation, right? So we did this study to look at the impact of Fortetropin on recovery in dogs that underwent TPLO surgery. So TPLO is the most common veterinary surgical procedure performed in the United States, and it's performed to repair tears of the cranial cruciate ligament, which is analogous to the ACL in humans. So 50 dogs, they receive Fortetropin on a daily basis, and 50 dogs received a placebo. And then a series of measurements were made at 0, 8, and 12 weeks, okay? These included thigh circumference, muscle thickness, stance analysis, and blood chemistry. And I will talk about muscle mass and weight-bearing capacity improvements in the next slide. But one important trend also relates to myostatin. So myostatin is a protein that puts the brakes essentially on the growth and development of new muscle tissue. What we observed is that the dogs that receive Fortetropin, they did not experience a statistically significant change in their serum myostatin levels, but the dogs that received the placebo 8 weeks following surgery experienced an average increase of about 10% in their serum myostatin levels. So here is a table that summarizes thigh circumference data for the Fortetropin group and the placebo group, and we also have weight-bearing capacity here. So you can see that the dogs that receive Fortetropin, they did experience a decrease in their thigh circumference, as shown here, but this decrease was not statistically significant. But when we look at the change in thigh circumference in the placebo group, we can see that the magnitude of change was roughly about 2.5 to 3-fold greater in the groups that received the placebo on the affected and unaffected limb. And this change was statistically significant with p-values of 0.03 and 0.02. Now, let's look at weight-bearing capacity, right? So under ideal circumstances, the dog should be able to distribute its weight evenly across all 4 legs, like roughly 25% of its weight should be distributed, placed on each leg, right? Now, after undergoing surgery, at the time of surgery, the amount of weight that can be placed is going to be very low. And then as you would expect, it's going to increase 8 weeks following surgery. And so when we look at the effect, the within group impact just of time, you can see that it's statistically significant in both cases, right? But the magnitude of increase was greater in the Fortetropin supplemented group. And then when we do a between group comparison between these two groups, the Fortetropin group and the placebo group, you can see that the p-value was 0.09 rounded up to 0.1. So we see that there was a trend towards increased recovery in the Fortetropin supplemented group based on force plate measurements. So we were very excited about that study that we did with dogs. And so that study has actually formed the basis of our animal health business. And we have a really good business that is focused on animal health. And I actually teach continuing education courses to veterinarians once a month for that business. But we got very excited about that, and we decided to sponsor a human clinical trial to understand if Fortetropin could help humans, right? I mean, in terms of recovery. So we're working with Professor Stuart Phillips at McMaster University in Canada, outside of Toronto, who's another KOL in the muscle physiology field. He has somewhere in the ballpark of about 250 papers. And the model that we're using is known as the unilateral leg immobilization model. So the idea is that subjects are going to wear a cast or a knee brace on their knee for 2 weeks, and wearing a cast is going to cause them to lose muscle mass. That's well documented, well understood. And so 2 weeks prior to casting, the subjects are going to take their assigned supplement, either placebo or Fortetropin. They'll continue to take it during the casting period of 2 weeks. And then after they're done with casting, so 4 weeks into the study, they'll remove their cast, and then that will start the recovery phase of the study where they'll continue to take their assigned supplement for the further 2 weeks. And then there will be a number of measurements that will be made, such as DEXA for body composition, ultrasound, myostatin, blood chemistry, and then there will be some accelerometry to look at actual muscle performance. So just to provide you with an overview, we're interested in 3 key areas on the human side of our business. One is sports nutrition, and the study at Tampa that I talked about really provides a scientific foundation for that sports nutrition business. We're interested in healthy aging, and the scientific backbone of that business is the study that I talked about at UC Berkeley. And we're very interested in the recovery and rehabilitation market. And so this is supported by the study that was published by researchers at Kansas State And we have a human clinical trial that is underway at McMaster University, which would provide further support for this business if the results of that trial are favorable. We've received a number of positive testimonials to date, many of them from professional athletes such as Carl Nelson, who played for the New York Giants. He was a former Super Bowl champ. I think he was part of the '87 Giants that won the Super Bowl. Joe Thomas with the Cleveland Browns, and Aaron Gordon.